You are listening to Pivot Parenting, episode 208, Grief and Loss While Parenting, with Krista St-Germain. Welcome to Pivot Parenting, the place where we recognize when your parental role needs to shift and how to do it. I'm your host and parenting expert, Heather Frazier. Oftentimes, we feel very alone in parenting. When our kids are younger, it is because we are physically isolated from other adult interaction. We're changing diapers. We're lucky to get a shower in. In the teen years, we are emotionally isolated. We don't want to out our kids. They're doing things that maybe we don't like. Maybe our marriage isn't going so well. But these are things that we can't share as easily with our friends and family. And so we bear it all alone. I wrote a book called How I Fixed My Teen. I just met somebody for the first time who read it last week, and she said that she had never felt so seen. She felt like she was the only one. My friend, if you feel like you are the only one, I promise you are not. My book, How I Fixed My Teen, is spending its third week as an Amazon bestseller, 5-star reviews, and it is because not only is it a quick, engaging read, but it is helpful. Helpful to not feel so alone, helpful to give you the steps that you need to improve your relationship with your teen. Now, I laugh at the title because oftentimes parents think if my kid would just do this or stop doing that, then everything would be fine. That's why I titled it How I Fixed My Teen. But since we are podcast friends, I'm going to let you in on a little secret. Your teen is fine and does not need fixing. In my book, I talk about how we as the parent can adjust and mature and create change in our family without our teen having to participate. Because I'm guessing you've tried a lot of things, and if they work, it's temporary, or it just makes things worse. So rather than meddling with our kids, I teach you what really works, what is sustainable and feels good to everyone in the home. If you want a closer look at how I fixed my teen, it's super simple. You can visit me on my website, heatherfrazier.com. Remember, Frazier is spelled Frazier, not like the TV show. It's also on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Walmart.com, all of those huge retailers. You can find it. So I invite you to have a closer look at my bestseller so that you can get the help that you need. Today on Pivot Parenting, I am talking with a fantastic coach who coaches on grief, Krista St-Germain. And I have looked up to her for a really long time and found her information to be so helpful in my own life and in speaking with my clients. I know that you're going to really enjoy this interview and find it really helpful. So here we go. Welcome, Krista, to Pivot Parenting.
I'm so excited that you wanted to have me on your podcast. Whenever anybody wants to talk about grief, I'm just so excited.
I love that. Was that always the case that you love talking about grief?
Dear heavens, no. Yeah, and also not something I ever really anticipated that I would be doing for a living, which is why it does feel very strange to say that. And I get that most people don't. But truly, I am excited because I know I would have had a better grief experience if I had had more accurate information coming into it. So really, truly, I mean it when I say I am excited that we can talk about it, because hopefully we can help some other people, right? We can help your listeners have a better experience.
Yes, that's the whole goal. So can you give my listeners a little bit about Krista St-Germain?
Yeah, absolutely. I won't tell you the birth to 40 story. I'll speed up and we'll start in midlife. So, I got into grief work because when I was 40, I lost my husband, and it was completely unexpected. I was woefully unprepared, but basically I'd gotten through a not so great divorce, right? And remarried. And in my mind, he was proof that amazing humans, amazing relationships exist, right? Proof that I could be happy and I could be treated the way I wanted to be treated and have what I wanted. And everything was just looking up, it felt like. And we had taken a trip together. We drove separately on that trip, and I had a flat tire on the way back, and we were so close to being home. We were like just north of the city on the interstate, and I had a flat tire, and we pulled over. He pulled up behind me, put his hazard lights on, and even though we had AAA, we could have called AAA and had them come and change the tire, but he didn't want to. He didn't want to do it. Right, baby,
It takes
just
too long.
let me change the tire. I just want to get home. I just want to, cuddle you and see the dog and whatnot. And so I'm standing on the side of the road, texting my daughter to tell her we would be late. And a car that we later found out the driver had meth and alcohol in his system. And it's 5:30 on a Sunday. Wow. It's daylight, right? Hazard lights on. He did not see us at all. So, and just crashed right into the back of Hugo's car. And because he was in my trunk trying to get the spare tire, but trapped him in between his car and my car. And it just went from what felt like perfect life to within 24 hours, he was gone. That perfect life was gone. And even though I had a great therapist that I went back to, she had helped me when I was going through my divorce, and she was amazing. Most of what I thought I knew about grief turned out to be inaccurate, unhelpful, not valuable. And I kind of got to the other side of it and then decided I don't want people to have the experience that I have. This can be easier if we talk about it more. Mm-hmm. And so now, that was 2016 when he died. But now what I've been doing since, I guess 2018 is coaching specifically widows and helping them love life again, right? Create post-traumatic growth and giving them accurate information about grief. So that's how I got here. It was literally by accident and not something I anticipated ever doing. It was not part of the plan.
Yeah. And I have to just say, your podcast is phenomenal. Even though I'm not a widow, I have listened to it and referred it to widows that I do know. And it is so good. Everybody needs to listen because there's valuable stuff to be learned.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And it is very niched. The title, it's called the Widowed Mom Podcast. So that I know that turns people off when they don't identify as widows, but really I do try to make it something that's valuable for anyone who wants to learn about grief.
Yeah. And for everybody listening, if you're multitasking, you don't have to write any of this down. It's in the show notes. So Krista's podcast and all of her contact information is there. So the reason why I had you on is because I feel like when parents are raising teens, there's a lot of intersection with loss. I lost several of my grandparents as a teen. Mm. My kids just lost a grandparent. Mm-hmm. And then you have teenagers who are being teenagers, and sometimes we lose them, whether it's through accident, illness, death by suicide, all of these different things. And so I see this great loss of conversation that needs to be had with our kids when they're teenagers, but it seems so heavy and so adult, and we don't want to talk about it, and it's really hard. Enter Krista, where we can learn how to address this with our kids, because it is something that is part of their life. Yeah. With how the timing intersects with so many other moving parts.
Yeah, it absolutely is.
Yeah. So we can take this from several different approaches, but I want your take. When they lose a friend or a parent or a sibling or a grandparent, is there a difference in how we would approach or help our child through this?
Mm-hmm. So first, I think it might be helpful to just consider at least how I define grief. I think that will frame the conversation well. So
Yes.
I define grief as the natural human response to a perceived loss. That's not just bereavement, right? That's not just the loss we feel when someone dies. That is the response we have when we perceived we have lost something. So that could be a person, that could be, just an expectation that we had for how life was supposed to go, and then it didn't go that way.
It can, for sure, it can be an experience as well. Like our kid tried out for a lead role and didn't even make anything, or they tried out for the team, or they were dating somebody and that person stomped on their heart.
Right. Yeah, we thought life was going to go a particular way, and it didn't. And to us, that feels like a loss. Right? That's grief. So there's so much individuality when we define it in that way, right? Even if the loss was, let's say, a grandparent, right? That it was a death loss. And so let's say, the teenager lost a grandparent and you lost your parent. Well, it's the same person, right? But but the loss will be different for each person because it will mean something different to them.
Yeah.
And it's not that we all should have a universal experience of the same loss. It's that we all have individual experiences of the same loss. So I think that's an important thing to remind ourselves as we are approaching it. What might feel like a huge loss to them might not be a loss that we really understand.
Sure.
What might feel, one sibling might be absolutely devastated by the loss of a grandparent, but the other sibling isn't. Not right, not wrong, just different experiences of the perceived loss. So what makes it hard, or harder than it needs to be, is kind of some of the assumptions we have around how we should feel or how we should approach loss. So if we're stuck back in, 5 stages of grief thinking, right? If we think that grief is supposed to be formulaic or prescriptive or linear or similar, or that it ends, we're going to have a difficult experience.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you just pause? I love your teaching about the 5 stages of grief, because a lot of us just assume that that's fact or that that's the proper way to go about it. And I love your take on this. Will you share that with our listeners?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked, because it's really one of my biggest pet peeves.
Yeah.
And it's not to anyone's fault, right? But it's one of my pet peeves, because when Hugo died, that was what I thought grief was supposed to be. I thought grief was supposed to be 5 stages. That was the only grief theory I'd ever heard of. And when I ask most people what grief theories do they know about, they only know about the 5 stages. And I think it's very interesting to go back and understand that the 5 stages of grief was, first of all, an anecdotal study created in 1969, which, if we do the math, is a long time ago, right? There's been a lot of new thinking since then, but it was Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, doing anecdotal work on what she was noticing in hospice patients who were coming to terms with their own mortality. It wasn't even really about grief. It was about dying. And so her first book was called On Death and Dying. And then later, she and David Kessler expanded that work, right? And took those 5 stages: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance, and applied them to what they were seeing in grief. They never meant, and she never meant, for her work to imply that you were supposed to go through 5 linear stages. She was just reporting on what she was noticing some people were experiencing. And there are many other grief theories, just like there are lots of theories about how to be a good parent and lots of theories about how to be healthy, right? But that one theory, the 5 stages, seemed to be the one that caught on in popular culture. It's the one that's talked about in movies. It's the ones we hear about. And so it seems to be the only one that people know. But she never meant it to be prescriptive. She never meant it to be linear. She never meant to imply that acceptance was a place that one time you arrive and then you're done, right? She never meant for people to use her work in a way that said, once you get to the end of acceptance, somehow you're done with grief. And it's just not that at all, right? If we can't undo the loss, we're always going to have a response to it. So our response is going to change over time, but we're always going to have the grief because we always have the loss, right? So we're not trying to get to the end of anything. I see it as we're trying to integrate. We're trying to go from a place of, thinking without intention to a place of really thinking with intention and deciding what we want to make of the loss and what we want to believe about the loss and who we want to be given that the loss happened. But unfortunately, a lot of us are out there measuring ourselves going, am I angry enough? Is this the part where I'm in denial? What is acceptance supposed to look like?
Isn't it silly how we want to do things right?
Oh, don't we? Don't we?
We do, because then we know it's going to be okay.
Well, I mean, also for me growing up, I don't know about you, but like you follow the rules, you get the good grades, you get the gold stars, and that equals love and safety and acceptance. And so of course you want to do it right.
Yep.
And yeah, a lot of us come into grief trying to do it right and worried that we're going to do it wrong. When in reality, there just is no such thing. There's no right, there's no wrong. There just is different experiences for different people.
Yeah. So if I'm understanding correctly, grief is normal and natural. And whether it is parents, spouses, friends, however feels authentic to approach it is the right way.
Yeah, whatever you think and feel about the loss is your experience. And it's not wrong, and you don't have to change it.
Yeah.
And so to say, how do we compare? Well, it's almost an impossible question because we can't really. Everybody's out there having their own individual experience of things, and that's just the way that grief is.
Yeah.
So if we can normalize that, it gets easier.
Yeah. Yeah. One of my daughters last week said it feels wrong to be happy.
Mm-hmm.
I feel guilty for being happy. I feel like I need to be sad. I think that that's a really common belief around grief, that we are dishonoring them, that we're being disrespectful if we are still enjoying life.
Yeah.
What do you say to parents about that question?
Well, just generally speaking, that feelings aren't problems.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Feelings aren't problems to solve. Whether we say it's a desirable feeling like happiness or an undesirable feeling, right? Air quotes, like despair, they aren't wrong. And what makes them harder and what creates suffering is when we judge ourselves for having them, or when we, judge them for existing. So happiness in and of itself doesn't mean you didn't love them enough. It doesn't mean you're not doing grief right. It doesn't mean anything other than you're a human, right? And we all have all of the emotions. So very, very common that we have a feeling we would classify as desirable, and then shortly thereafter, a judgment about having had that feeling. But it's so optional, right? We don't have to do that to ourselves. It doesn't mean anything about your love for them or your grief if you are experiencing joy or happiness or something other than sorrow.
Yeah, yeah. And I feel like that might be the flip side too, to maybe I'm not sad enough, or I shouldn't be sad for this long, or again, just it's crazy how we think it should look a certain way, or we should or shouldn't have specific experiences that maybe we're having.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But somewhere we picked that up. Somewhere we learned that this is what grief looks like. And then we have an experience that doesn't match what we thought it was supposed to look like. And then instead of having the eureka moment of, oh, maybe it wasn't supposed to look like that, right? We usually just internalize it and blame ourselves for having the wrong experience.
Yeah.
Right. We don't question what we learned it was supposed to look like. We tend to question our own experience.
Yeah.
Reality is that we all have different experiences. None of them are wrong.
None of them. And I've heard studies where we're quizzed before something happens of how would you feel if this happened? And then it happens and we behave very differently than what we anticipated we would behave like because our nervous system kicks in. And our nervous system can put us into shock and do all kinds of crazy things. How would you help the parent who is in that initial shock phase, whether it's them directly or their child comes home and says, you know, this fellow student of mine passed, and they're in shock?
I mean, again, if feelings aren't problems, then we just get to feel how we feel. Right? And it's okay to be in shock. If we have nervous system tools at our disposal, right? Anything body-based, I think it can be very helpful. So I don't know what your favorites are, but I am absolutely in love with tapping. I'm absolutely in love with, okay. Yeah. Simple. I mean, even just like a heart hold, ways of reminding my nervous system that even though it might feel like I'm in danger, I'm actually safe in this moment. Feel very good in those really intense times where it's hard to think and everything feels out of whack. But it's not wrong because you feel that way. And it's also not wrong if you don't.
Fair. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. We both love tapping. Are there other modalities that you also like?
To me, it's all about simple things. So, and it's kind of contextual. So if I'm in a place where I can tap, I mean, sometimes I don't even care if anybody's looking and I'll still tap anyway.
We all
but
do
I get
it.
I get that that's not everyone. So, things like, bilateral stimulation I will do, right? Where you hold an item in one hand and then you move it across the midline of your body and you just keep switching sides. I find that to be particularly useful. Or even a lip tap I find to be useful. Or, butterfly tapping. And anything that is cross-lateral, I won't say that's maybe not every move of those is helpful to me, but some of those are very helpful. I find such great relief sometimes in just expanding my peripheral vision. Right. So just looking at a fixed point, right? Because when our nervous system senses danger, what we really need to be able to focus on is the danger in front of us, which is why sometimes things tunnel in.
Sure.
Right. So it can be really helpful to me to just stop what I'm doing and look up and notice what I notice in my periphery. And as I'm breathing, just notice a little bit wider and a little bit wider and a little bit wider. There's so many different ways.
Yeah, there are.
Yeah.
When I feel like our kids oftentimes try to diminish or escape their feelings. And sometimes parents jump on this bandwagon as well. Like they're really upset and they are maybe trying to work through that in a way that the parent doesn't see as appropriate. And we can try to diminish or talk them out of it or distract them, like by saying, well, let's, go grab something to eat, or let's just watch a movie or other things. And one of the things I love that you teach is that there's two parts to moving through grief. There's doing the work and then there's resting.
Yes.
And maybe I'm rushing into this question. What is the difference between avoiding and resting?
I think it's kind of the intention behind it. Or maybe the belief behind it. So first of all, thank you for bringing that up because it's another thing that I just so wish I had known. So what you're talking about for your listeners is called the dual process model. And the dual process model of grief basically divides things into two buckets. So restoration oriented things, right? Things that give you a respite from your grief, things that are not related to your grief, and grief-oriented things. So thinking about the loss, feeling the feelings of the loss, dealing with the logistics of the loss, right? So we've got the restorative things and the grief-related things. And what dual process model proposes is that healing is found in the oscillation, the back and forth, right? We do some grief-related things, we do some restoration or related things. So sometimes what happens is if we don't know that, then when we're doing the restoration oriented things, meaning we're not thinking about our loss, we're doing something else, we can often find ourselves doing that and then judge ourselves for doing it. Right? Oh, I was just laughing with a friend. I shouldn't be doing that. No, actually, that's a really great thing to do, right? Take your mind off of it. We want to go back and forth, back and forth. But what you were saying as it relates to avoidance, I think is the belief behind the avoidance that I can't handle this thing, this feeling, right? So I have to get away from it? Or is the belief behind it that allowing myself a break is healthy? So if it's a constant, like, I can't handle this, so therefore I will travel, overwork, drink a lot, eat food, watch movies, like do things to distract because I believe I can't handle it any other way. And I need this as a way to get away from this thing that I can't handle. That's when we probably want to consider other ways versus, no, it's totally normal and human to take a break. And just because I have a feeling doesn't mean I always have to feel all these feelings. Like, it's okay to just take a break and do something else.
Yeah. No,
So,
you coach widowed moms.
mm-hmm.
So how do parents with a grieving child, like let's say their son is playing video games because he can't sit still with his own brain because of loss or grief, how does a parent approach that child to help them?
Well, first, I think we got to recognize that there is no perfect way. There is no one way. There is no right way. Even if we could all agree that there was a perfect way, we could follow it, and each child is going to respond differently because they're their own unique humans and they have agency. And so we can't just say, well, if I do it this way, it'll all turn out and be great.
Life would be so simple if that's the way things were, that there would be one parenting book and we would all be set.
Yeah. So knowing that, though, then we think about, okay, what are the examples that I want to set? What are the skills that the child might benefit from learning? And how can I set that example and help them learn those skills, right? So we can set the example by doing it ourselves and talking about what we're doing. And if we're learning about different ways to allow feelings and different approaches, because for most of my clients, just like it was for me, it's new information that we didn't get growing up, right? So we're learning a different approach, and we can speak into that as we learn so that the child is kind of hearing it. I think that is tremendously powerful. And I see my clients' children changing simply because of what my clients are role modeling. Not that they're explicitly telling their child, you should do what I'm doing, but just because they are bringing the child in on what they are doing, right? And they aren't requiring of themselves that they go to their room when they have a feeling, right? Or that they do those things in isolation or act strong. They're actually showing what it looks like to allow themselves to have a feeling and support themselves as they do it, right? One of my favorite stories about that was I had a client who basically did that with her son, right? Just started role modeling it. And then at one point overheard him on the phone with one of his friends teaching his friend what his mother had role modeled to him.
There's no better compliment.
So the ripples that are happening from stuff like that just make my heart so happy. So I think we don't want to underestimate that. And then also from a skills perspective, we can think about, okay, what is the skill that, my child doesn't have, and how could I help them get that? So for instance, my youngest works with a tapping coach. I literally, he came to me and said, Mom, I think I'm carrying my feelings around like a Santa sack. Like, all right, let's go. Right.
Yeah.
So you want some assistance with that? Here's some ways that have worked for me. And, let's get you these resources too. So that could be coaching, that could be therapy, that could be, things like the tapping solution app. I mean, there's all sorts of ways to help kids get skills, but we got to be the ones that see what is the skill that they don't have yet.
Yeah. And I think that it's prudent to normalize seeking help and making sure that they know that you're happy to provide that for them.
Yeah. And I'm seeing that. So I have a 20-year-old and a 16-year-old, and I am seeing that more and more in their generation, that it is very common for their friends to have therapists. It is very common for them to be talking about wellness and feelings, and so much more than it was, when I was their age, for sure.
Yeah. Okay. This question kind of overlaps with offering this with our kids. Some parents I hear say, I don't want to use them as a crutch, or I don't want, like, I'm trying to protect them from further emotional distress by just like putting on a smile and pretending that everything is okay, because it would upset them to see me upset. And I don't want to upset them. And oftentimes these parents are also uncomfortable with emotions themselves, right? Like they don't want anybody to see them upset. But how does that overlap and not overlap with what we were just talking about as far as mentoring them and showing them how we're handling things?
Yeah. So, firstly, about the whole idea of, a crutch, or sometimes what I see, maybe not the word crutch, but is parents not wanting to make they don't want their child to be their go-to person to
It's not a
process whatever
peer-to-peer
they've got to
relationship.
process. No, and it shouldn't be, right?
It should not be.
It shouldn't be. And also, I think we do a great disservice to our kids when we don't show them how we are handling things, how we are supporting ourselves. If all they ever see is happy forced
Mom's
smiles,
fine.
it's fine, I'm fine, everything's fine. Then they begin to measure themselves against that experience, which, as we know, is not the human experience any of us are having.
Yeah.
So I think there's a middle ground. It doesn't have to be I let them in on every emotional experience I have, right? Or I make them responsible for any emotional experience I have, but I show them that it is human and good and healthy to have emotions, that they aren't problems to solve, and that here are some ways that I support myself when I'm having them, right? Here are some ways that I'll allow them to flow through. And so I'm just normalizing that in the home, right? And not making it problematic or not making it something to hide. My littlest.
So when a loss comes up, those tools are kind of already in place then.
Yes. Right. Yeah. And I also think it can be, very kid specific, right? Like different children are going to have different approaches. Where we pick them up, I don't know. But I know with my youngest, when he was little, and he would always say things well before Hugo died, he would say so many times, Mommy, are you happy? Mommy, I just want to make you happy. Right. Always so sensitive to my happiness, and always, for some reason, so convinced that he could control it. Right. And so for him, I did a lot of normalizing of, buddy, you can't make mommy happy. It's only mommy can make mommy happy. If mommy's unhappy, it is not your fault. And also, you can't make me happy. So your happiness is your job and my happiness is my job. Right. And it's okay if I'm not happy.
Yeah.
And it's not your fault. And so, but for my daughter, that was never a thought in her mind, ever. If it was, she certainly didn't share it. She was not really so concerned about
sure
my happiness.
Nothing wrong with that.
Nothing wrong with that. But different things for different children.
Yeah.
But if you have open discussions like that and you have the opportunity to have those conversations, that's when you find out what your child might be struggling with, because that's when they're more likely to let you know.
Yeah. I love your analogy about like a screen and water's flowing through it.
Yeah.
So can you explain that analogy? And and how parents can support themselves and their teens during that flowing
Yeah.
process.
As you're saying it, I actually have a client and her daughters that come to mind. So that just the idea is like sometimes visual, metaphors help.
Oh,
If
yeah.
water is flowing down a hill, right? Water being the emotion, what a lot of us do is we try to dam it up. We try to, well, I don't
Yeah.
want it, right? It's not supposed to be here. It's a problem.
Stop,
And the
stop.
solution is like, yeah, to make it stop or to, put something in its way. And what happens when we do that, right? The water starts to back up. Eventually, it's probably going to find its way around or over. There's no amount of, damming really that makes the water do what we really want it to do in terms of emotions. So what I like to imagine is if I feelings are so much less work if I don't have to dam them up. If I don't have to do anything, if I don't have to stop them, if I don't have to make them go anywhere, and the only thing I have to do is allow them to flow through me. Right? I just like imagine that I am the screen, like a screen on a window, and the water just flows through that screen, and I don't fight it, and there's nothing wrong that it's happening. It's just flowing right through me. Then emotions get a lot easier, and nothing builds up, nothing backs up. It's easier. Even just telling your kids that, right? This is what I'm doing. Be a screen. I'm literally thinking of a client she's actually a team member now, but that was one of the things that she practiced with her girls after their dad died was being a screen. And they use that with each other, right? When one is struggling and they can tell that the emotion is hard, that's the language that they use is we're just going to be the screen. It sounds so corny, but
Relax. Just relax.
really just let
What
it
does
flow
that
through.
look like for people who are new to this work and they're like, I can see the screen in the water, but how do I actually let emotion flow through me?
Yeah. I use an what I call now, NOW, as a way of bringing some specificity to this process because I think it helps. So now stands for name, open, and witness. So name is just give some language to the emotion. So this is anger, right? This is sadness. This is frustration. Name it. And then open up to it, meaning do the exact opposite of what your body probably is doing, right? Your body's probably trying to close off to it, get away from it, recoil from it. Just like in labor, right? In labor,
Yeah, we tense.
we tense up. So the opposite of that is to open our chest, to drop our shoulders, to breathe in, right? To relax. And it feels counterintuitive, but we kind of know, at least with labor, that tensing makes it worse. And it's the same with emotions, right? So relaxing makes it easier. So breathing it in, opening up, giving it permission to be there. And you can actually say, this is anger. I give it permission to be here, right? I give myself permission to feel this. And then witnessing or watching it as it flows through your body, right? Watching, not judging the experience that you're having, but just noticing what it's like, watching it, being the one who experiences it as opposed to at its mercy.
Yeah. No, what about the folks who say, yeah, but that's so scary and I don't know if I can handle it and I don't know if it will ever stop.
Yeah, I totally get that. And I don't think you have to force it. I think sometimes the easiest way to move from, not really feeling much to developing the skill is just to start with little opportunities. Start with the emotions that feel good to you and that you don't have resistance around. What
That's a
is
good
it like
idea.
to allow those, right? And just to get familiar with them. And then you can kind of ease your way in or start with, okay, I'm going to let myself feel a little of this for 5 seconds. And
Okay.
then
So
I'll go right back out.
you can set a timer and be a screen for just a set amount of
Totally.
time.
Totally. Also, I think anything you can do that tells the nervous system that you're safe as you allow a feeling, which is why I love tapping, is so much easier.
Yeah.
Right? Because with tapping, you're really just articulating the truth as you tap on parts of your body that help you feel safe. And so it can be so much easier. But even with tapping, you don't have to go to the stuff that intimidates you the most or seems the most overwhelming, start with the stuff that feels more along the lines of good or neutral.
I love that. Baby steps. Okay. Full confession.
Okay.
I'm actually a pretty big fan of crying. What's your
Heck yeah.
take on crying?
It's so interesting. I was thinking about that actually the other day. I was thinking about how much I cry in comparison to how much my partner cries, and how much I cry in comparison to how much I used to cry. I cry regularly now, and and I won't say fully unapologetically, because sometimes, like if I notice myself starting to cry in a session with my clients, then no, sometimes I'll notice a little bit of judgment there. But so much easier for me to cry and feel good about that is just part of emotional processing. It's just what needed to happen. And very often, tapping will elicit crying for me. But yeah, like let's cry all the tears.
Yeah.
If they're there, if they need to come out, they need to come out.
Sure. Yeah. All right. We're coming to the close, but do you have any other grief gems of wisdom that we haven't gotten to yet?
I just want to offer post-traumatic growth as an option.
Yes. Okay. Yes.
Because I wish that option had been offered to me. I wish I had known about it sooner.
Can you explain to people what it is?
Yeah, absolutely. So post-traumatic growth is a phrase that was coined in the mid-90s by a couple of researchers. Tedeschi and Calhoun were their last names. And they were, at this point in time in the mid-90s, first of all, when we thought about trauma, we kind of talked about it with very objective language. So there were certain events that we had classified as traumatic and certain events that were not traumatic. It was not, now we know it's very much a subjective experience that each individual has. But at that time, we were thinking about it more objectively. And we were thinking that when something that happened to a person that we thought of as traumatic at that point in time, we were thinking that really there were kind of only two options. We were thinking that option number one was that their level of wellness or quality of life would decrease and stay there. And option number two was that their wellness or quality of life would decrease, but then they could bounce back to where it was before the quote unquote traumatic event. And what these two researchers noticed was there is actually a third option happening, which was that people were bouncing down, but not just back, they were bouncing forward. They were actually reporting greater levels of life satisfaction and quality of life because of something that they had gone through that was classified as traumatic.
And why was that?
Yeah, right? Why was that? Why are some of their studies were done on widows too. They were like, why are some people losing their spouse and reporting that life is better now, and some people are not? And what they found is that really, as with anything, we always get to be the ones who choose what we make of any experience that happens to us. And it is an option to go through a loss or a grief experience or something that we perceive as traumatic and decide, okay, who do I want to be in the face of this? What do I want to make this mean? Right? What do I value? And am I living in alignment with that value? Like, I like to think of it like, because I live in Kansas and we have tornadoes here, I like to think about post-traumatic growth as a tornado comes and knocks your house down. You didn't ask for your house to get knocked down, right? But it got knocked down. You've still got the land. What are we going to do now? You could take the original plans that you had for your house and give them to a builder and say, hey, please rebuild this house as closely as possible to the one that I had before. Fine, right? Also, though, you have lived in that house for a while now. You have learned some things from living in that house. You could also take the opportunity to ask yourself what improvements you might want to make. What do you want to do differently in the house? Do you want more light in the kitchen? Do you want a bigger closet? Like what have you learned from living there? And then adjust the plans and build that house. That to me is post-traumatic growth. It's saying, okay, here's what I've learned. And based on what I've learned, here's what I want to do differently. And that might mean I change relationships. That might mean I change careers. That might mean spiritual changes, right? That's how I show up and who I am and how I spend my time. I've taken into account what I have learned based on this thing that happened to me. And now I'm making changes accordingly. Doesn't mean I am happy that my house got knocked down. Doesn't mean I'm grateful that the tornado came. It just means I've decided what I want to do with it. And so the goal isn't to just get back to what it was like, in my opinion, although that can be. It's also an opportunity to reassess and take inventory and adjust so that you continue to create more of what you want because of what happened, right? Not in spite of it. And I think what holds people back is sometimes they hear this and they think, well, great, there's one more thing I got to do, right? As if the loss wasn't bad enough. Now I got to grow from it. No, you don't have to, right? It's not morally superior if we grow from our grief, but it is an option to always continue to make choices that have us living even more of what we want. And it doesn't have to be the goal to just tolerate life or find a new normal, right? Yeah. To kind of resign to like, well, the best days are behind me. We actually can continue to believe that the best days are in front of us.
And that's a beautiful thing to model for our children.
Yes, because it won't just be their grandparent that that's not going to be the only loss.
No.
Right? Grief is a part of being human.
Yes.
And so, yes, it is. And I fully acknowledge, right? Losing Hugo is for sure not going to be, it's the biggest loss to date that I have experienced. Who knows what's in the future? I don't.
Yeah.
But nobody's going to take away my ability to choose what I want to make of the things that happen in my life. I do know that.
Oh, so good. So good. Thank you so much, Krista. Is there anything that you have going on that my listeners should know about that you want to tell them?
Just the Widowed Mom podcast, honestly, is where I love to hang out. And again, they don't have to be widows to come and listen.
Yeah, no, so much value.
Yeah.
For everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming and sharing your wealth of knowledge with us.
Thanks for being willing to normalize talking about grief.
Yep, it's important.
Yeah.
Heather is the one, an expert in